letters of marque. You will offer what amounts to a full pardon. Jack will be free, a privateer in the employ of England.
Somehow I doubt Jack will consider employment the same as being free.
Freedom.
You might have remembered this scene from the second Pirates of the Caribbean movie, where Cutler Beckett offers a letter of marque to Jack Sparrow. This will function as a pardon for Jack's crimes as a pirate, and simultaneously turn him into a servant of the crown, a privateer. Could this have happened in history? In practice, yes. But the situation has been oversimplified, and the terminology fumbled around. You always hear the word letter of marque tossed around in discussions regarding pirates. The usual explanation is that a pirate could be given a letter of marque, turning him into a privateer, a legal pirate. It wasn't that simple, and it's completely wrong anyway. Maritime law is, and was, incredibly complicated. You needed different authorizations to do different things. You couldn't just enter a port or location without permission. Some would call this needless bureaucracy, and sure, it was often abused by corrupt officials, but it was implemented for a reason: to hinder espionage, smuggling, and piracy. You wouldn't just receive one document which pardoned you for piracy and hired you as a privateer. First, Jack would need a pardon. Secondly, he wouldn't get a letter of marque, but a commission. This is basically a freelance contract to complete a certain task, not a permanent employment. It could be anything from capturing pirates, recovering a shipwreck, or trading. Multiple objectives were often included in the commission. Bartholomew Sharp was given a commission to hunt for savage Indians and pirates. A merchant captain named Charles Swan was commissioned to trade with the Spaniards and Indians. The most well-known commissions are wartime commissions. We usually hear about the letter of marque. Contrary to popular belief, letters of marque were never issued to pirates or privateers, and it didn't make you one. Instead, they were given to merchants, and it allowed them to capture enemy ships during their merchant voyage. To better explain this, allow me to present a hypothetical scenario. We found ourselves in the late 1600s. France and England go to war. Most of their battles will happen at sea. Their goals are threefold: defeat the enemy fleet, keep your own economy afloat, and damage the enemy economy, reducing their ability to fund their armed forces and popular war support. To defeat their opponent, the government primarily relies on their men of war. This refers to a ship of any size or type, outfitted specifically for combat. Today we'd call them warships. These men of war are owned and funded by the government, and form what is called their national navy. But during the 1600s, very few governments were rich enough to subsidize a navy capable of doing everything. They could basically only protect the coastlines, pursue or defend against enemy fleets. They did not have the time nor necessary skill set of keeping the economy afloat, or to damage the enemy's economy. Enter merchant ships. Their task is, of course, keeping the economy afloat. But merchant ships of the time were well armed, allowed them to defend themselves against pirates, and sometimes to initiate trade by force. Their crews and armament theoretically allowed them to not only defeat enemy ships, but to capture them as well. And that's a nice bit of money on the side in it. So, let's say a merchant captures another ship. That's piracy. Why? It was an enemy ship, wasn't it? Well, how can he prove it? How do we know he didn't take a neutral or even a friendly ship? That's where the letter of marque came in. It basically authorized the merchant captain to seize enemy ships, if he had the possibility of doing so, and if the ship was an enemy. It wasn't the main objective of his voyage, that was trading, but it was a cost-effective opportunity to haunt the enemy economy. So now you have two entities entirely dedicated to fighting the enemy and bolstering the economy. You still need a unit wholly dedicated to damaging the enemy economy. Enter privateers. Just like the merchant captains, they own their ship privately, or have been given command over it by a group of investors. But unlike the merchant, they are entirely dedicated to attacking enemy commerce. So the government issues them a special commission called Commission for a Private Man of War. It's kinda lengthy, so it's usually referred to just as commission or privateering commission. Privateer is an abbreviation of private man of war and stems from the 1660s. Basically, a privateer is a government contractor, a mercenary. He's employed by the state, for now at least. The act of privateering, taking enemy prizes in war, is known as commerce raiding. In French, commerce raiding is called guerre de cause. It is their most common word for privateering. French privateering commissions were called lettres de cause, and the privateers were called cossairs. Subsequently, Spanish ones were called corsarios. The term is most associated with the Barbary coast, Algiers. But during the period, the Barbary corsairs were not known as such. Europeans called them Sally rovers, or simply Turks, Moors, or Algerines. These were all synonymous with Muslim privateer. The Algerians called themselves Ghazis, holy warriors of Islam. I did not cover them on my channel because they were much too different from other pirates, and it's disrespectful not to discuss them as a unique phenomenon. Speaking of phenomenon, buccaneer was the English word for the colonial American sea rovers active between 1660 and 1700. Some were privateers, some were pirates, and there was a lot of overlapping. Their depredations were largely tolerated, as they were beneficial for the military and economic development of the early Caribbean colonies. In French, boucanier, which the word buccaneer stems from, referred exclusively to hunters on the island of Hispaniola, who smoked meat over a so-called boucan. The French word for buccaneer was flibustier, filibuster in English. It either stems from the Dutch word freebooter, free pillager, or from the ship type flibot, flyboat, a speedy type of craft. In English, buccaneer was a slightly offensive slang, and many buccaneers prefer to call themselves by the more respectable title of privateer. To the French, flibustier was an honorary title. To distinguish flibustier from pirates, the French used the word faubon, their word for pirate. So what is a pirate? Let's say a hypothetical war comes to an end, but our privateers continue commerce raiding. That technically makes them pirates. They are no longer legally permitted to take prizes, but do so anyway. They are actively harming our peace negotiations and attempts at legitimate commerce with the former enemy. So why did the privateers turned pirates do this? Maybe they haven't received news of the treaty yet, or maybe they don't care. Capturing prizes is their way of life, and they intend to stick to it. There is also another term, sea rover. It is an umbrella term for anyone who takes prizes at sea, legally permitted or not. It is not in common as English as it is in, say, Dutch. Basically, letters of marque were only given to merchants, permitting them to take enemy ships as a sort of side quest. If you wanted to become a legal privateer, you needed a commission for a private man of war. These were usually referred to as a privateering commission, or simply commission. But how did you acquire one? A commission was structured as first having a large title, describing the type of commission and who had issued it. Next was written the object of the mission, capturing enemy prize ships, in what region, against whom the commission was eligible against, and for how long the commission was eligible. Some commissions had a set time frame, others lasted the duration of a conflict, others were only eligible during a governor's term. The commission could expire if he expired. But let's say there isn't a war going on, but you still want to continue roving the seas without being declared a pirate. Was there any way of doing so? Well, you could seek a commission from a foreign nation. During the Anglo-Spanish War between 1654 and 1671, French, Dutch, and English buccaneers not only fought the Spanish under English commissions, but Portuguese ones also. Portugal had recently broken away from their dynastic union with Spain and were fighting a war for liberation. When Spain and England signed a peace treaty in 1671, France would continue their fight against Spain for most of the remaining century. Buccaneers turned to the French for commissions. England kinda realized that English sailors operating under foreign commissions was kinda harming their attempts at peaceful trade, so they forbade their sailors from operating under a foreign commission. It didn't exactly work out. Privateers were often issued pirate hunting commissions when a war concluded. They could keep the pirates' plunder and auction the ships off at a prize court. However, setting a privateer to hunt their former comrades was ineffective and seldom worked out, unless if it was against a rival nation. Spanish pirate hunters operated very effectively against the English and French, and vice versa. But English versus English, or even English versus French, not exactly. The real deal were letters of reprisal. If you were somehow offended by a foreign nation, such as having your cargo confiscated by them, a government authority might give you one of these permits. It allowed you to seek compensation from the enemy, by force. During wartime, they are often combined with letters of marque. Letters of reprisal were sometimes offered in peacetime. This was, of course, a very dodgy and harmful practice. The English largely stopped doing it after, 1660, but they remained somewhat popular with the French. Most famously in 1683, when Nicolas van Hoorn had his cargo of slaves confiscated by a Spanish governor. He was given a letter of reprisal, and soon thereafter, Van Hoorn had amassed one of the largest buccaneer fleets of the century. They just needed any legal reason to be allowed to go and plunder. Farnho's reprisal ended in the brutal sack of Veracruz, and though it was legitimate, the Spanish didn't care. The reprisal led to more reprisals, the Spanish capturing both French and English ships and burning the settlements of New Providence and Petit Goâve. Similar to the letters of reprisal were little clauses found in some commissions. Charles Swann's trading commission gave him the right to defend himself against any insults or affronts. Swann would later use this as an excuse for piracy. Indeed, all types of commissions could be misinterpreted to fit the pirate's twisted goals. Anything to protect him in a court of law. So how did you acquire a commission? The best case was to personally receive it from the king. Well, maybe not him directly, but through one of his lackeys, and signed by him. The next best thing was to get them from an important European politician, and finally, a colonial governor. The problem with these, especially the latter, was that they could expire after a certain time, or if the person issuing the commission died. So if you did what the commission said after it expired, like plundering a ship, it would be a crime, and you'd technically be a pirate. In the colonies, commissions could be purchased. Petit Goâve sold blank commissions at very cheap prices, so the captain only needed to sign his name. During the 1660s, Port Royal even issued blank commissions, for free. I imagine a lot of these blank commissions were forged, and some crafty pirates might even forge a commission aboard their own ship. You could even steal a commission. When a privateer crew mutineered against their captain, they would often steal his commission to avoid ending up in the gallows. This happened to William Dampier during his disastrous stint as a privateer, and almost happened to George Shellback, but he managed to hide his commission. Privateer crews were basically uncontrollable. Corrupt officials were lax, and as long as the money kept pouring in, they didn't exactly care about the validity of your commission, or what it regarded exactly. Some pirates forged their commissions out at the sea. Others modified the information, like changing the date of their validity. 3 months could become 3 years. That's a lot of time to make your fortune. When John Coxon and Bartholomew Sharp departed Jamaica to sack Portobello, they used a pile of outdated French commissions and a Jamaican let pass as a justification for their crimes. A let pass was the simplest form of license to English vessels in the Caribbean, merely identifying the bearer and requesting that they were allowed to proceed into a particular destination. Sharp and Coxon's let pass allowed them to go into Honduras and cut logwood. It didn't say anything about, killing Spaniards and burning their towns. The examples get more ridiculous. One group of French filibusters had a commission to fish, fowl, and hunt. But according to them, it included the right to attack and burn Spanish cities. And, it could get even sillier. When Bartholomew Sharp and his buccaneers crossed the Panama Isthmus and entered the Pacific Ocean, they befriended the local Kuna. Since the Kuna were at war with the Spanish, the buccaneers claimed that the king of the Kuna had granted them a commission to attack Spanish possessions. Buccaneer writers like Basil Ringrose, John Cox, and Sharp himself said that this was entirely legitimate. They were the privateers of a native king. They even called him emperor, as to raise his importance. Emperor of what? William Dick was perhaps the most honest among them. Thus we disengaged from the pretended service we had preferred unto that emperor. I call it pretended, for as much as anyone would easily guess that the real intent thereof was only to serve ourselves with gold and silver, and learn intelligence from those Indians. If you captured a prize illegally, the captain could take you to court, gain compensation, and see you imprisoned. Your victim could demand to see your commission. Such interactions often ended like the one between Richard Sawkins and the governor of Panama. When the governor asked for Sawkins' commission, the buccaneer replied that he would bring our commissions on the muzzles of our guns, at which time he should read them as plain, as the flame of gunpowder could make them. So basically, there was a legal definition separating the pirate from the privateer, but it wasn't that simple. Almost every pirate, even the dreaded Ned Lowe, called himself a privateer. The decision of whether a rover was a pirate or a privateer was entirely subjective and depended on personal attitudes, the political situation, and local culture. In my follow-up video, I will discuss the differences between privateers and pirates, if there even were any.